this is a shot that's taken just outside the restaurant, about 1 kilometer from the doors of the restaurant, and this pretty much represents the kind of terrain that we work in, and this pretty much represents the kind of areas that I would forage in. This is a little list of things that we work with, and I'm quite certain that a lot of what you see here is probably also available here, and also one of the reasons why I want to do this talk here in Canada is that I kind of think that a lot of things are probably quite similar when it comes to climate and flora from Sweden, from the northern parts of Sweden to here. And if anyone has a particular interest in this, they can just email me and I send the list, because it's very long, so I'm not going to go through that now. So, the vegetable garden. This is something that I'm very proud of. And it started same year as the restaurant started, 2008, with me just digging up a little vegetable patch, maybe 20 square meters or something, and farming a few vegetables for us. And I quickly realized that growing your own vegetables is really, really interesting in many ways, because you can control the whole process. You can choose the variety that you think will suit your needs, and then you can farm it exactly the way you want, and you can harvest it when you think it at its peak, which is really great. And also in the summer, you can work with things that are really fresh. You can basically send the chef down, you can pick the pea pods, and then run up to the kitchen during service and more or less pop them on the plate, which you couldn't do if you didn't have your own garden. So these are one image from early spring, when everything is just coming green and lush, and this is one image after the first snow, and it's the same spot as you see. This is the gardens during the summer, when it's a little bit nicer, and when they're sort of in full bloom. And this is during that really nice time when we have everything available. So this is how the gardens are sort of laid out. And we use, for me, gardening is a learning process. And as you see, it's kind of grown a little bit bigger than 20 square meters. So it's 0.6 hectares now, so 6,000 square meters. And we experiment with a few different techniques. One of them is obviously crop rotation, which is something that everyone at grows vegetable probably knows about. And we're experimenting with different types of crop rotation to see what gives us the perfect yield and still maintains the quality of the soil without depleting it. If we start sort of on the left there, we have a 4-part crop rotation, which means that there are 4 parts, and they each sort of move place every year, which means that it's going to be 4 years between, for example, if you grow brassicas, like cabbage and stuff, they use a lot of nitrogen from the soil. The year after that, you're going to grow something that refills the stalks with nitrogen. You're going, for example, grow leguminous plants, peas and beans and stuff. And that's sort of how it goes on. And we do this not only to keep the soil healthy, but also to prevent the buildup of microbes that could affect all these different crops. This is an image from the 4-part crop rotation, which is quite a sort of straightforward farming that you would see, or vegetable growing that you would see in any sort of home vegetable patch, I guess. We have this white sort of fiber cloth to mainly in the spring to keep the seedlings away from the frost. So if you have late frost, they won't kill off all the seedlings. In the middle, we have a 6-part crop rotation, which is a more intense way of farming the land. And this one has 30% of it always covered with leguminous plants that are not harvested, but just sort of turned down into the soil every autumn to give back nitrogen. Leguminous plants, they have a little bacteria on the roots that bind nitrogen from the atmosphere. So you can sort of, by rotting them in the garden, you can more or less fertilize it without adding any fertilizer. It's quite cool. And that part is also covered like this, you see. So there's a matted black cloth with little holes for all the crops. And this is something that enables us to grow things up there that you normally shouldn't be able to grow there. Because it elevates or heightens the soil temperature quite a lot. So this makes our growing climate almost the equivalent of the one in the southern part of Sweden, 600 kilometers to the south. So we can more or less grow everything but celeriac. That just doesn't work for some reason. Down to the right, we have a 3-part crop rotation, which is actually my personal favorite, because I find that the 6-part one, the most effective one, it kind of takes away a little bit too much of the nutrients from the soil. And since we don't use any machinery, it's all turned by hand with a pitchfork, it's quite difficult to put that back in the soil again by adding manure and by adding green manure to leguminous plants. So this one is actually my favorite, and it sort of works in the same way. It's less intense, and instead of the matted cloth, the textile cloth, we use just clippings of grass to cover the soil, to keep the humidity in and to elevate the soil temperature a little bit. The herb gardens. This is actually, the red house is the restaurant. In the back, the one with the sort of the higher ceiling, that's the dining room, and the hotel would be in the part that's closest to the herb garden. And this is where we grow all the things that we would use as green vegetables during summer, and all the herbs, and also all the herbs that we would dry later on in the year to keep for the winter, for use in the winter. So, when it comes to storing, when you store vegetables, you have to make this decision. Either you kill them, or you use, or you don't do that. And if you kill them, it's basically, the idea is that you kill the vegetable and you keep everything else in the sort of restricted area around the vegetable. It can be, for example, a culinary jar, a glass jar. And you can, for example, take a carrot, you can put it in with some brine, and then you can pasteurize the whole thing, you can cook it in an oven. And then you kill the vegetable, but you also kill everything else around, and that will make it keep for a long time. You can pickle it, you can add vinegar to the jar, you can add a lot of salt, and you can do different things that sort of make it keep. And this is probably, when people thinking of preserving vegetables, this is most often what sort of pops into people's mind, and it's the killing techniques. And there are also non-killing techniques, and I think what's important to realize is that none of them are better. They're just very different. It produces different results. But what I think is interesting with those techniques that don't kill the vegetables is that you have different mechanisms within any vegetable that can make them keep for a long time. For example, all the root vegetables that we harvest, they are biennials. So they grow from a little seed the first year, and during the summer, through photosynthesis, they collect a lot of energy which is stored in terms of carbohydrates in the root, which is what we consume. And the idea is that in the end of the first summer, they go dormant and they lie in the ground, under the snow, all through winter, and then in spring, because they have all this energy stored up, they don't have to wait until they have enough sunlight, they can just grow really quickly before anyone else can grow, and they can put their seeds earlier, so they get sort of ahead in the race for world domination, probably by beetroots. And this is what we use. We just fool the vegetables. We pick it up at autumn when it's sort of going dormant, when it's ripe, when it's mature, and instead of leaving it in the ground, we just put it in, for example, sand in our cellar, in our root cellar. And then, instead of letting the vegetable go to bloom the next year, we eat it during the winter instead. This is interesting, I think. All of these methods to prolong the shelf life, or to make vegetables keep for a longer period of time, it's nothing that makes them better, ever. It just makes them different. Like, if you pull a carrot up from the soil and you eat it straight away, it will be the most carrot it will never ever, or it will be the most carrot it will ever be. Like, everything you do to that carrot after picking it up from the ground, it's going to make it less of a carrot. And it's not going to make it more of a carrot, it's just going to make it more different, and that's also good though, because that might be something you want, and that's something that we've seen, because we started storing vegetables out of necessity, because we wanted to serve vegetables of great quality all through the year. And then we realized that doing this, it gives a lot of character. You know, it gives a certain flavor to our food that we wouldn't get if we didn't do these things, which I find interesting, at least. Yeah, that's it. So many of the green vegetables can be kept in the gardens, and they don't mind if it's a bit cold. And this is in December, so it's about -25. And you can still harvest them, and it doesn't really matter if they freeze. And it's really interesting, and I don't know why actually, and I've spoken to a lot of people that should know why, but it's like, if you harvest that broccoli in September and you freeze it in your freezer inside, and then you defrost it, it's a frozen broccoli, and it's so floppy and boring. If you leave it on the plant and you let it freeze, and then you harvest it, you just break it off in December and you take that in, it's a fresh broccoli. And it's very interesting actually. And we often do this with the different brassicas like broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts and so on. We just leave them and they can stand there until we use them all or until the moose have gotten in and eaten them all because they really like them. This is a method of using what I talked about earlier with the sort of that non-killing technique for root vegetables that uses the natural function in them to lie dormant during the winter. And you just collect all the root vegetables, you dig 2 little ditches or trenches for drainage, and with a little sort of raised mound of soil in the middle, you put a little bit of straw to drain off any water that comes in there. You put all the root vegetables on top of the straw, and then you dress it with even more straw to insulate over them, and then you sort of cover the whole thing in soil. And you make like a nice pyramid or sort of a nice sloping shape like this so that any water can run off on the sides and don't sort of go into the actual clam. And this is one of the oldest techniques of keeping root vegetables, and it works really well. It's quite unpractical though, because you have to dig down there so there's no and also when you have broken the clamp, when you picked out your first root vegetables, you kind of have to take everything out. You can't just take one and then close it up again because it will be cold in there and so on. Onions and garlic, usually we dry those, and it's actually, like often if you buy onions, they have the leaves cut off, which is something you should never ever do with an onion. You should just take them, harvest them, place them next to your garden and leave them to die naturally. Because what they are doing is that they're also going dormant, because they are also set on reproducing next year and producing many tiny onions. And when you leave them like this, so that the leaves can dry and die, they seal themselves off from the outside world, so that later on, when you cut the leaves, no mold or bacteria is going to be able to go in that way. If you cut them when they're fresh, they're going to rot in a month or so. So when they're completely brown like that, you can take them in, you can dry them, you can hang them, and they will keep easily for a full year. Pasteurizing. This is one of the killing techniques. Just take your product, put it in a jar like that, maybe with some brine or something else, and then you keep it. You put it in your steam oven or in a casserole with water, and you start heating it. And you have a thermometer in there, and you heat it until you reach 90 degrees, and then you keep it at 90 degrees for about 10 minutes. You close the jar and then you cool it down quickly, and this will kill or immobilize most of the microbes that are in the jar. And this is one of those techniques that can be a little bit scary, because there's going to be an oxygen-free environment in the jar, and then you can have sort of growth of something called Clostridium botulinum, which is not particularly nice. It's one of those bacteria that will kill you if you have them in there. And the thing is, so what you need to make sure is that either you store them under 4 degrees at all times, because then you know that you have no Clostridium botulinum, or you see too that the pH level is under 3.84, which a lot of acidic food stuff actually is. Then you have no Clostridium botulinum. Or you just heat them after, like when you take them out of the cellar and you heat them over 80 degrees, because that destroys the toxins, then they're safe even if you had Clostridium botulinum from the beginning. So it's those 3 things that you need to sort of respect and understand if you're going to do that. Pickling in vinegar. Here you use the pH level in the product. You add vinegar to make other bacteria not like their little jar. No, okay. So most bacteria, they don't like low pH levels. It's more or less only Acetobacter and Lactobacillus that likes living in acid environments. So you can use that to your advantage, and you can avoid the most dangerous bacteria by pickling. Pickling with lactobacillus fermentation. This is also quite a safe method. It's used for gherkins and sauerkraut and all kinds of stuff. What you need to do there is to make sure that you reach a low enough pH level quickly enough. And what's happening in there is that by adding salt to a solution of water, you're making a brine basically, and put the gherkins in there, you will make the environment favorable for lactobacillus, because they don't mind a little salt. Most bacteria, they don't like salt because salt takes away accessible water for them, so they can't really reproduce. When the lactobacillus, because of that unfair advantage, grow, they also produce lactic acid from carbohydrates in the solution. And that sort of further protects the foodstuff. And what you need to make sure here is that you reach those 3.84 or lower in pH very quickly. You can't let it sit there for a week with nothing happening. It has to sort of ferment quite quickly and go down. And the easiest way to control this is actually to buy some litmus paper on the pharmacy. It costs nothing, and you can see exactly what pH level you are on. Or if you're really serious, you can buy a digital pH meter as well, but they're quite expensive. Drying herbs and mushroom. The most important thing when drying things is to do it really quickly. We use that one. It's an industrial dehydrator. It's placed in a room. It takes away about 15 liters of water from the atmosphere per hour. And this makes it possible for us to dry herbs in room temperature in about 1 hour. And if you do it that quickly and at that low temperature, you will have all those nice fragile aromas left, like the ones, because often, you know, dried herbs, they smell like hay. They smell like nothing what they did when they were fresh. But if you do it quickly and at low temperature, you'll actually still have that. And also, since you take the water away that quickly, the enzymatic breakdowns of all the green stuff in the herb, it stops. So we'll have a very nice, brightly colored seasoning as well. Using antibacterial properties, natural present in plant, I used lingonberries to show this. A lot of berries, they contain a lot of things that keeps bacteria and mold away. The lingonberries, they contain something called benzoic acid, which is something that the industry would add to foodstuff to keep them from molding, basically. And in lingonberries, there's so much benzoic acid, so you can just take fresh lingonberries, put them in a jar, and then just top up the jar with water. You don't even have to heat it or anything. You can just close the jar and put it in the cellar, and they will keep for years. Nothing happens in there. And what's funny is that you can put other things in there as well. You can put like a piece of cabbage in there, and after a year, it will still have the texture of a fresh cabbage, but it will be a little bit pink, and it will take the taste of lingonberries. Leguminous plants. We use them in all stages of the plant's life, from like tiny little shoots in the spring through fresh peas and beans in the summer, and then we harvest and dry the seeds in the autumn. And this is something that we would do with the dried seeds. And this is something that is also a little bit risky, but also very interesting. We take, for example, brown beans and peas. We infect them with the mold spore, which is called Aspergillus oryzae. And this is something that probably a lot of you guys already heard about, but it's the same mold that makes soy and miso and all those things in Asia. And we just, been working a lot with that, but also with other molds of bacteria. And this will produce something very similar to miso paste. 3 minutes too long.